Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Happy listening. Ponniyin Selvan, Fresh Floods, Kalki, translated by Pavitra Srinivasan. Chapter 2, Arval Kadiya Nambi. Vandiyadevan spurred his horse down from the banks towards a path that went south. His heart at the moment was light as a feather, almost tumbling cartwheels in delight, much like the boats that had skimmed forward so effortlessly on the lake's surface. His had always been an optimistic nature, willing to anticipate pleasure rather than pain. Sheer exhilaration bubbled up from deep within, coursing through his veins. Something whispered to him that he was about to embark on a strange and wonderful journey. Ah, if he could feel such delight just by stepping into Chora dominions, how much more enjoyable would it be as he journeyed beyond Kollidam? How alluring would he find those lands, overflowing with natural beauty? What would the people, especially the women, be like? Such rivers, streams, and delightful clear ponds. What a magnificent sight would the river Punni present, enshrined in countless poems and epics. Her lush banks, crowded with Punnai, Konnai, and Kadamba trees, weighed down with their fragrant blossoms, would gladden anyone's heart. Doubtless, he would be treated to the sight of red lotuses, kuvalai, and kumudam flowers in ponds, enticing him as they unfurled their delicate petals, their subtle scents wafting towards him in welcome. Richly carved temples, built by Chora kings renowned for their piety, would greet him on either side of the river's banks, affording opportunity for quiet devotion. Ah, Parayarai, divine, beautiful Parayarai, the illustrious Chora capital that had wrested pride of place from such Chora mainstays as Pumpuhar and Urayur. The latter cities were nothing more than insignificant villages at the moment. Such temples, mansions, palaces, wide avenues, soldier quarters, magnificently carved stone temples for Shiva and Vinnagara temples for Vishnu, as Parayarai boasted, were never to be found anywhere else. Vandiyadevan had heard tales that the simple, charming Tevaram and Tiruvaimori verses, sung with touching devotion by versatile musicians, were capable of melting even a stone. Now he would have an opportunity to listen to such soul-stirring melodies himself. That was not all. Soon he would have the honor of an audience with one who was popularly held to be the equal of Manmadan in beauty and Velan for courage, none other than Maharaja Parantaka Sundara Chorar himself. Even more important, he would meet his daughter, the much-loved and revered Chora princess Kundavai Pirati as well, provided of course he met with no danger upon the way. What if he did though? He had his spear, his trusty sword hung sheathed at his waist, his armor protected his body from injury. Best of all, his heart possessed enough courage to overthrow any calamity. But then, there were Matanda Nayakar Aditya Karikala's instructions to him as well. They would prove a stumbling block indeed. He wasn't to descend to brawling with anyone, no matter what the provocation. Well, that might prove a difficult proposition. Still, he had managed it thus far, a considerable distance, hadn't he? Just 2 days more. Until then, he would have to keep his temper in check. It had been Vandiyadevan's intention to reach Kadambu Sambhuvarayar's palace by the time Adavan sank in the west. He set steady pace and soon found himself trotting up to the Veeranarayanapura Vinnagara temple. The Adi Tirumanjanam festivities meant that the already popular shrine was teeming with droves of people, filling even the surrounding groves. Stalls had erupted in every available corner, selling slices of jackfruit, bananas, cuts of sugarcane, sweetmeats and savories. Others sold flowers with which women loved to adorn themselves, and lotus buds meant for divine worship. Some stalls were overflowing with heaps of coconuts, ilanir, fragrant incense like akhil, sandalwood paste, and other necessities such as betel leaves, jaggery, and puffed rice. Business was brisk, but fun and frolic had their place as well. It was not just the vendors who thrived. At certain appropriate corners sat astrologers, palmistry experts, men who advertised themselves as masters at reading signs and divining the future, and slick magicians who swore to remedy any poisonous bite. People milled around all of them, enjoying the sights and scenes. So did Vandiyadevan as he cruised slowly through the organized pandemonium. At one point, though, the uproar seemed to be at its rockiest best. Crowds of people thronged around, and some voices were so loud that they permeated even the festivities. Evidently, an argument was in progress, and judging by the heated shouts, a vociferous one. Every instinct in Vandiyadevan tugged at him to immerse himself in the dispute. He simply could not help himself. He brought his horse to a halt by the roadside, a little outside the crowd, and climbed down. Communicating to the steed to remain in place was a moment's work. Vandiyadevan patted the animal, broke into the heaving crowd at an opportune position, and plowed through its ranks with alacrity. What he saw when he arrived in its midst made him stop short in astonishment. The cause of the massive argument and yells that had almost reached the heavens were just three men. They might be minuscule in number, but the surrounding crowd more than made up for it. Each verbal combatant, it seemed, had his own ardent following that shrieked its support whenever he put forth a particularly brilliant argument. And this, Vandiyadevan saw, was the real reason for the clamour. Once he had taken the time to observe all this, he bent his mind to the dispute on hand. One of the three men was almost smothered in sandalwood markings that denoted the symbol of Thirumal, or Lord Vishnu, and wore a top knot at the front of his head. His short and stocky build proclaimed a hardened body. He held a staff as well. The second was a Shiva devotee, adorned liberally with stripes of vibhuti, sacred ash. The third happened to be clad in saffron and sported a bald head. He, it was soon to be understood, was neither a Vaishnavite nor a Saivite, but professed to be beyond such definitions, one who followed the tenets of the Advaita Vedanta philosophy. "You are Valkadiyan Nambi, listen," announced the Saivite. "Haven't we all heard tales of Brahma and Vishnu searching in vain for the head and feet of Shiva Peruman? Didn't they fail spectacularly to bind him to such pitiful dimensions and finally fall at his divine feet, begging forgiveness for their transgressions? How, in all honesty, can you argue that Thirumal is worthier?" This was a sign for Arvarkadiyan Nambi to brandish his staff in a wide arc. "Stop this instant, you who worship the dust at Shiva's feet," he bellowed. "Your blessed Shiva Peruman was the one to rain boons on the undeserving head of Ilankai's demon king Ravana. But didn't all those ridiculous powers come to nothing before the divine bow of Vishnu's incarnation, great Rama? How could you possibly argue that Shiva is more powerful?" The saffron-clothed Advaita monk barged in. "Really, I fail to see the point of these petty arguments. You may debate the greatness of Shiva or Vishnu until the end of time, but there would be no purpose to it. The only truth, the greatest of them all, lies in Vedanta. You, who still prostrate yourselves at the feet of mere deities, are doomed to follow the paltry Bhakti Margam. You are too ignorant to understand that the spiritual path, Jnana Margam, lies above, and the Nyasa Margam even more so. Once you arrive at this point, you will realize that there is no such thing as Shiva or Vishnu. Everything is Brahman, the cosmic consciousness. Sarvam Brahma Mayam Jagat. I should like to elaborate here on the excellent essay in the Brahma Sutra Bhashyam written by Sankara Bhagavadapata, wherein he quotes, "Cease your ridiculous drivel," yelled Arvarkadiyan Nambi. "Do you even remember what your sacred Sankaracharya did after scribbling endless essays and commentaries on the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita and Brahma Sutra? Listen to this. Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Bhaja Govindam, Mudamade." Hear that? He is instructing mindless idiots like you to chant the name of Govinda and redeem yourselves. That's what he says. And the crowd erupted into jeers, laughters, and scornful exclamations. This comprehensively rude argument did not seem to have any effect on the sannyasi. Indeed, I have lost my mind, you top-knotted ruffian. All you do is brandish your ridiculous staff in my face, and I truly have abandoned my senses to even stand here arguing with the likes of you. I am, in fact, a Moodamadi. Oi, I may have just a simple staff in my hands, you saffron robed hermit, but it has its uses, breaking the heads of the likes of you. And Arvalkadiyan raised his staff as though about to bring it down on the monk's unsuspecting skull, which sent the crowd into wild paroxysms of delight. The Advaita ascetic, it seemed, was unfazed by such an unbridled enthusiasm to bash his brains in. My man, kindly refrain your fanaticism and keep a hold on your staff. I am disinclined to take offense even if you do wreak havoc on my head. Nothing you do or say will make me angry. I shall not descend to your level and abuse you either. That which strikes me is Brahmam. That which bears the strike is Brahmam as well. If you do break my head, you will only be injuring yourself. Hear, hear, my dear friends, crowded Arvarkadiyan Nambi. The sacred staff will now descend upon Brahmam's head, duly wielded by the supreme Brahman itself. I am going to bash myself up, and he stalked towards the monk. Vandiyadevan, watching the altercation, felt an overwhelming desire to wrench the staff from the excitable Nambi and deal him a few well-placed sacred blows upon his revered person himself. But stay, the monk was nowhere to be found. He had taken advantage of Nambi's antics, the general distraction, and made his swift escape through the crowd. Arvalkadiyan's devout supporters roared in approval. It was now the turn of the Veera Saiva Pataduli Bhattar to face the Vaishnavites' ire. Well, my beloved Shiva devotee, what say you? Prepared to go head to head with me in an argument, or would you prefer to make a speedy escape like our friend the monk? Ha, certainly not. I, unlike that verbose idiot, am no coward. Or perhaps you thought I might ape your blessed Kannan, stealing ghee and curds from the homes of the gopis, getting thrashed with churners and... Arvalkadiyan butted in before he could finish. And your Shiva was utterly without blemish, I suppose? Who was the man who played around instead of carrying earth to build a bund for the river Vaigai and got caned for it? And Arvalkadiyan's advance upon the Saivite, brandishing his staff once again. It must be mentioned here that while the Nambi was a stout, muscular fellow, the Pataduli Bhattar was built along gaunter lines. This seemed to be the sign for the surrounding crowd to promptly gird their loins and prepare for all-out battle in support of their respective idols. For some reason, Vandiyadevan felt an instinct to end this ridiculous bout and stepped forward. "Why do you fight amongst yourselves over such silly things?" he said in his clear voice. "Don't you have anything better to do? If battle is what you want, Eram is in the midst of war and has plenty of opportunities to test your mettle. Couldn't you take yourselves there and fight to your heart's content?" Nambi turned to him in an instant. "Who's the man who dares to teach us our business?" The crowd was now inspecting Vandiyadevan. His bearing, which suggested valor and a certain nonchalance, appealed to them, not to mention his open, handsome countenance. "You are very right, Tambi. Do teach these quarrelling men a lesson," they offered. "We will support you." "I shall tell you whatever I know about such things," Vandiyadevan elaborated. "It doesn't seem to me that Shiva Peruman or Narayanan are fighting amongst themselves. From what I can see, they are on very friendly terms. Why then must this Nambi and Bhattar try to break each other's heads over them?" This very reasonable explanation drew a round of laughter from the crowd. "You seem sensible, at any rate," acknowledged the Bhattar. "But charming speeches will not serve to end this argument, you know. Tell me, young man, who is the greater god, Shiva Peruman or Tirumal?" "Both," was Vallavarayan's reply. "They are equals and everyone is free to worship whomever they please. Why must we fight over them?" "How dare you?" bristled Arvalkadiyan. "What's the proof that they are equals, eh?" "You want proof? Well, that I can offer in plenty. You see, I was a guest to Vishnu's divine abode, Vaikuntham, yesterday, and whom should I see there but Shiva Peruman, also there on a visit. They seemed to be great friends. I saw them seated on similar thrones side by side, and their height was exactly the same. Still, I didn't want to entertain any doubts and decided to verify it myself. I used my arm as a measure. Boy, how dare you make a mockery of us? Arval Kadian fairly growled. Go on, Tambi, go on, cheered the crowd enthusiastically, and found that my measurements were accurate. They were of the same height. But I didn't stop there and decided to clarify the issue once and for all and asked them, which of you is the greatest? Do you know what they said? Shivan and Vishnu are like as peas in a pod. If anyone disbelieves this, fill their silly mouths with mud. They didn't stop with that. If anyone was stupid enough to still fight over them, they gave me this and ordered me to throw it in their mouths. Vandiyadevan opened his right fist. In it was a handful of earth, which he flung out. The crowd went into a frenzy at once. People began to scoop up and fling handfuls of mud at the Nambi and the Battar. Some tried to prevent them from descending into such vulgar antics. Ha! Scoundrels! Unbelievers! Shouted Arvar Kadian, plowing into the crowds. Infidels! The scene seemed ripe for a full-fledged riot, but something occurred, thankfully, to put a stop to the mayhem. Make way, announced a voice in stentorian tones. Warrior among warriors, the most valiant Udayar who broke the ranks of Pandyas and beheaded Mara Pandiyan. He who sports 64 scars from 24 battlefields, the treasurer of the Chora Empire and the guardian of their granaries, the lord who levies taxes, the most illustrious and noble Peruvettaraiyar comes among us. Parak, make way. Once the Kattiyakaran's thunderous voice died away, the sounds of a murasu took over, its loud beats echoing around, followed by those who bore the Paravu's standard palm tree flag. Warriors bearing spears marched upon the heels of these men. And finally, in the wake of such pomp and glory, appeared the warrior himself, a dark man, proud of bearing and majesty in every glance, seated atop a richly decorated elephant. It was a sight for sore eyes, akin to a dark cloud nestling atop a craggy, jagged cliff. The jostling crowd parted obediently to let him pass. Vandiyadevan followed suit, craning his neck to catch a glimpse of the warrior. There was no doubt that it was Periya Paruvettaraiyar himself. A palanquin covered with silk screens followed upon the heels of the elephant. Vandiyadevan felt a prick of curiosity about its occupant, but before he went any further, two things happened. A slender hand, tinted a delicate shade of ivory, appeared from within the palanquin. It pushed away the silk screen slightly, bangles clinking melodiously. A dazzlingly beautiful young woman's face appeared from behind the screen, like a radiant pearly moon from behind a dark, rain-laden cloud. Now, Vandiyadevan was not, in the usual way, averse to womenfolk or impervious to the charms of a pretty face. The opposite, in fact, was true. The lady he saw possessed a brilliant complexion and sculpted features. She shone like a golden full moon in the velvety night sky. And yet, Vandiyadevan's heart did not leap for joy at this undoubtedly ravishing countenance. Instead, he was conscious of a vague fear, an indefinable disgust. The lady's eyes alighted on something by his side. Her eyes narrowed as she stared hard. The next instant, a horrifying screech could be heard, and the palanquin's silk screen fell back into place. Vandiyadevan glanced all around. His instinct warned him that she had shrieked at something she saw in his vicinity. It was then that he caught sight of Arvarkadiya Nambi, a little behind him, leaning against a tamarind tree. The staunch Vaishnavite's face was almost unrecognizable, distorted with fury and hatred. Vandiyadevan stared at him, astonished and somehow repulsed. End of chapter. Thank you for listening. Do comment if you have any suggestions for books to read, and let me know if you have any feedback. Thank you.